Welcome everyone to this morning's webinar, where we will be teaching you how to meet your need for data speed with Performance Tuning 101. My name's Elizabeth. If we haven't met before, I'm our webinar wrangler here at SAFE, and I have the pleasure of joining our two presenters here this morning. So I'll pass things over to Dan if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Great, thanks Elizabeth. My name's Dan. I'm a technical support specialist here at SAFE Software. I specialize in the desktop side of FME, so I help new users get started with the platform. So, you'll see me on the community, live chat, those sort of things. But yeah, happy to be here.
Hi guys, I'm Jenna. I'm also a technical support specialist here, and yeah, I do the same thing as Dan.
Excellent. And before I hand things over to Dan to go through our agenda, just a quick intro to Livestorm if this is your first Livestorm webinar with us. I think we've been using the platform for about a month now. On the bottom left there, you'll see a help icon. If you do have any audio issues, click that for 4 simple troubleshooting steps. We have a reaction button in the bottom middle there, so share your reactions with us throughout the webinar. We love to see them. And then we have the questions and chat tab. So drop any questions you have throughout the webinar. We have Mark on the back end helping us out with any questions there. And we'll also have a Q&A session at the end. So be sure to leave your questions there for us. And then we have the chat. So any comments throughout the webinar, keep letting us know where you're joining us from. We'd love to see that as well. And then also, if you would like to download the slides and join along throughout the webinar, we do have that download button you'll see on the top right of the slide deck. And then, as always, we will always send out the slide deck in a follow-up email after the webinar today, in addition to that. And with that, I'll hand things back to Dan.
Great. So yeah, just a quick agenda of what we'll be looking at today with our webinar. We'll be first giving an introduction of performance tuning FME and when it might be time to consider performance tuning. Then we'll dive into some workspace authoring and design patterns. We'll be looking at updates with FME and how that can improve your performance. We'll then look at postmortem performance tuning and how to kind of debug and figure out when you also need to performance tune. We'll then look at some memory management to do with FME, some database performance tuning, and then we'll go into some Q&A.
Awesome. And I think at this point, we can probably turn off our webcams just to save on some bandwidth for the remainder. And we'll see you guys on the other side for Q&A.
Great. So yeah, we just wanted to start off this webinar with a quick chat storm. We want to hear from you guys. What do you think performance tuning FME means? So whether or not you've dived into this topic before, just let us know what you think performance tuning in FME means.
Give everyone a few moments to type that in, think through your answer there.
Yeah, go faster. That's definitely the main overarching goal of this.
Efficiency.
Yeah,
I see the word
settings.
efficiency. That's good.
Yeah, that's definitely a big thing here. Less RAM usage, definitely. Yeah. Cool. Some great answers here. I'm loving it. Faster runtime.
Ordering data for faster processing. That's very true.
Yeah. So with the webinar today, we're going to be learning how to efficiently build new and existing workspaces to save you time and fast track your data translations and transformations. So, with FME, the goal is not only to transform your data into the structure and format that you want it in, but it's also to make your workflows efficient, which is what we're going to be looking at today. So we're going to start off with a quick sneak peek of what you can expect from this webinar. And I'm just going to share my screen here. And I'll share my screen on this side. And this is kind of a preview of what I'm going to give you a quick before and after so you can get an idea of what we're going to be working towards. So, in this workspace, we've got lots of different readers. We've got lots of transformers, maybe some repetitive ones in there. Maybe we can filter out our data. Well, then we're going to be moving towards a more clean and concise workspace that looks like this. So with this workspace, it'll be running faster. We'll be reading in less data. We'll be filtering through our data to make sure that we're not using any unnecessary data. And this is kind of what we're going to be aiming towards today with this webinar. So I'll just go back to our slides here. And today, so I just wanted to start off by kind of going over when it might be time to performance tune FME Desktop. So there's a couple things that we'll want to consider here. First off is our volume of data. Are we working with a larger volume of data? And is there an opportunity to cut down on the amount of data or make use of bulk mode in FME? We also want to consider the complexity of our workflows. If we have a really complex workflow with lots of transformers, maybe lots of readers and writers, can we condense down some of these transformers and readers and writers? The general rule with FME is that we like to say that the less transformers, the better. And sometimes there's the possibility to swap out some transformers for more efficient ones. So, if you're using an attribute manager, maybe you just need an attribute remover, or, you could swap a feature merger for just a feature joiner, and that, all these have the possibility to speed up your workspace. We also need to consider the type of data. So spatial versus tabular is a common conversation here. Can we filter out some of this data? Do we even need the spatial component of our data that we're using? And we also can consider our time constraints of our tasks and our workflows. So if we're needing to run these workspaces on a schedule, maybe we're running them on an interval, are they running within that interval, or are they overlapping with other workflows or workspaces? And, that can create real problems. So that's probably, a good time to begin performance tuning. So how do we measure performance in FME Desktop, and how do we decide, whether this workspace is faster than this one, or is my workspace improving? Well, there's a couple things we can look at. We need to start off by taking a look at the log file and the time it takes to run the workspace. How does this compare to workspaces that we've seen before that we've been running, or is this a suspiciously large runtime for what should be, just a quick to run workspace? One thing to note here is the CPU time versus the full session duration. So the CPU time is time used by our computers or our machine's resources, and we can subtract this time from the total FME session duration to figure out how much time was spent on other processes. So in this case, this might involve retrieving features from or writing to a database, or it could be that we're working with a web-hosted service, such as ArcGIS Online. So CPU is more, maybe our computer is limiting our workspace runtime, or if we see a lot of the time in our workspace is being spent on, retrieving features from a database, then we might have some things that we can improve on the database side. And, if we're using web services, then perhaps we want to update our connection to faster connection method. Maybe we want to connect to a web service that's closer geographically. That, those sort of things can make a difference. So just a quick overview, if you're not familiar with our company. Safe Software is a leader in enterprise spatial data integration. And as you might have gathered from these slides, our mission is to help you maximize the value of your data. And today, our enterprise integration platform, FME, enables over 10,000 organizations, 16,000 organizations worldwide, with over 190 global partners. And we have lots of active users on our FME community, which is a great place to ask questions and, get some good ideas going. And our FME platform, we have FME Desktop, which is what we're going to be focusing on today. We also have FME Server, where you can automate your data workflows. We have FME Cloud, which is just FME Server hosted in the cloud by Save Software. And then we also have FME Mobile. And we are constantly growing our formats. We started out with just GIS and CAD, and we've moved towards, up and coming formats, and we're always listening to our customers to hear what users are using. And as we move towards these new formats, this can introduce issues and slowdowns in our workspaces. So it is important to, understand where we're moving towards, and this might be a great time to kind of consider performance tuning your workspaces. So at this point, I'll pass it off to Jenna to talk about workspace authoring and design patterns.
Great. Thanks. Yeah, so I'm taking it over from here. So for the first part of this presentation, let's start going over some workspace authoring and design patterns to look out for when it comes to performance tuning. So the first topic that we can touch on is attribute cleaning. So feature caching is the first thing we'll talk to today, and a best practice when it comes to authoring a workspace is to make small changes and run those workspace often to kind of debug and test those results. And frequently running a workspace can be really time consuming, and this could be mitigated by feature caching, which will allow you to hold the data cached in a disk. But this also slows down your workspace. So by disabling feature caching, you can really help to free up that extra disk space that could help to speed up your workspace. The second way that you could help to remove attributes is, or remove attributes that are not used during translation, is to get rid of them early on so that they're not carried on forward to the rest of the process. And generally, you really want to follow that design pattern of reading your data and then removing the excess attributes and then go on to processing your data. Some transformers that could really help with this process is the attribute manager, the attribute remover, the attribute keeper, or the geometry remover. The next point we'll talk to is data filtering, which is similar to removing attributes, and it's also really important to filter these excess features early on in the translations. Following the similar principle as before, filtering your unwanted data early in the process really helps to prevent those unnecessary processes from happening. For example, in this little screenshot we see here, the tester is filtering for attributes that are only contained to British Columbia, and it would filter everything else contained in other provinces that may not be necessary for your translations. Some transformers that could help with this process could be the tester, the test filter, and the geometry filter, just to mention a few. The next step, or the next tip we'll talk about, is reducing duplication. So another really good thing to look out for are chains of duplicate transformers that could be condensed into a single step with a different transformer. For example, here in the bottom screenshot, we have the attribute renamer connected to an attribute renamer. And this could be achieved in one step inside an attribute manager. Though it's not always possible to condense every step, it's a good idea to be aware of what's happening in each step with your transformers so that you're really maximizing time and being efficient with your workspace design. Just some additional tips here. Another really good way to reduce time is to reorder your writers. For example, this can be changed in your navigator really, and the writers listed first on the list are the writers that are going to be processed first. And by ordering the writers from largest to smallest can really help you keep that larger data from being cached in your memory while you're writing out your data. The second tip here is to take advantage of the group-based processing when it's available for a transformer. Group-based transformers are the ones that process multiple features simultaneously. For example, this could be intersecting many lines or features at a time, producing networks. And here I have an example of the clipper, which you're able to group process with. And by checking that button, you'll be able to start group processing with that transformer. So we'll quickly move on to a demo that touches on some of these principles that we've talked about. So I'll share my screen. So we'll work through an example similar to what Dan showed in the beginning. So in this scenario here, we have, oh no, a bunch of readers and some transformers and 2 writers. So in this scenario here, we're reading in a geo package, and we want to take some information from, well, this is a geo package of Vancouver here, and let's say we want to take some information from the amenities and public transport to make our own little cool map of Vancouver. But here, it's not looking too good. Let's run this workspace first and see how long it takes us to run the full thing. We see some coordinate extractors, an exposer, some testers, a filter. And really, the problem here might be all these readers running in that we're not using, right? So let's let this do its thing first. We can see all the readers going in order. You can already tell that this might not be the most efficient way to design your workspace. So just first things we can notice off the bat here while this is running is we're not really following that principle that we mentioned earlier of filtering and removing those things you need before processing. And that caused us to take this a total of 48.6 seconds to run this whole thing. So let's look at what an ideal version of this workspace might look like. So this workspace here achieves the same thing, but it kind of follows the principle that we talked on earlier of removing those attributes and features early on using a tester and geometry filters so they're no longer carried on through the workspace, and then moving on to some processing. Also, we're only reading in parts of the data that we are actually processing. So when we added this geo package, I only selected the amenities and public transport, which are the ones we're interested in. And if we run this workspace, compared to the 46 seconds that took the other workspace, this one should take much less. And this one takes just under 6.8 seconds, which is a massive improvement. Given this is a really simple processing, it doesn't have any spatial data, we can just see how much performance tuning can matter just on redesigning your workspace like that. Right, so that kind of wraps up the authoring part. And in the next slide, we'll talk about some FME updates and improvements that can be considered for performance tuning. So FME is constantly developed to bring you the best version of the tools, really. And updates that are made to FME can be categorized as either automatic or premeditated updates. So automatic upgrades are pretty self-explanatory. These are applied to your FME engine as you upgrade to the new FME version automatically. And these updates are always backwards compatible, and they won't alter the behavior of your existing workspaces, but it'll enhance the overall performance. Premeditated updates are controlled by the users, and it's not applied automatically. Whenever you upgrade to a new version of FME and you open up a workspace authored in a previous version, you can look for a section in the navigator window labeled as upgradable transformers. These are optional upgrades that you can apply to a transformer, but before doing so, you should always check the changelog of the transformer to see if any changes that were made that might affect the results of your current workspace. We don't always recommend updating all the transformers you see available for upgrading, but it's really good to be mindful of the changelog to see if the upgrade could affect any existing processes before going ahead with the updates. Because these updates are not always backward compatible, it may not be, so it's really important to be mindful of the changelogs before applying these premeditated upgrades. The last step that I'll be talking on today is the post-mortem performance tuning process. So the post-mortem performance tuning process can really help you identify some areas to perform tuning after you've authored your workspace. Using time spaces or timestamps in your translation log can really help assess the stages of the translation that you may need to reassess. And to measure the performance of the key stages, it's really good to run the workspace with everything but first the readers disabled, then the writers disabled. And this helps you calculate how long the actual process is taking and maybe what the bottleneck in your workspace could be. For example, you might see that first workspace I showed earlier with the bunch of readers and go like, oh no, I'm not processing everything correctly. But if you had disabled the reader and ran the whole thing after caching the data, obviously, you'd see that the process isn't slow, but it's really the problem of reading in all those readers that could be your bottleneck. Another way of obtaining some postmortem performance tuning data could be to run a profile to obtain a detailed log of how much time is actually spent on each underlying step. And I'll walk through those 2 points on updates and improvement in the postmortem before we move on. So the workspace itself here, we won't focus on for now, but we'll more focus on the navigator here of the upgradable transformers. So I authored this workspace in 2019, I think, and I've opened this in 2022, and we see a few transformers here that are upgradable. So when it comes to upgrading, let's say we want to upgrade a point cloud expression evaluator. You'll see here that if you click show changes, we can see the upgrade transformer button here, and it'll show you the 2 versions side by side. And if you click the show changes here, it'll give you the change log of what you should be aware of before upgrading to the next version. So that's one way to see if it's maybe an option for you to upgrade. And the other point of profiling, how profiling works is you can move to the tools bar, open the FME edit header, and then in the first line you see here, if I can zoom in a bit, I've added this in my own here on the first line. You can add in FME profile results.csv and then add in a file path of where you want this to go. And when you run the workspace with that header, you'll get a CSV file. I've run this previously and I've just opened it in Data Inspector here. You'll see what it took for each factory time to do what process. And it kind of gives you a better understanding of what's going on time-wise. And at this point, I think I'll hand it over to Dan for the next few steps here.
Great, thanks, Jenna. So I'm just going to continue on talking about FME memory management. So in this topic, we're going to be discussing, kind of what are some of the causes of memory issues, and these issues can directly affect how fast FME is going to be running. So probably the first and most obvious one is going to be, insufficient computer resources. And this is not always the most economic method for resolving. Not every organization has the ability to add more RAM to their machines, but sometimes, memory resources are certainly needed to get your workspace running successfully. So it's still something good to know about. Memory-intensive applications can also have an effect on your machine. They might be hogging some of your RAM, and if FME is unable to access that memory for its own usage, it's definitely going to be adding some slowdown. Memory fragmentation is another thing that can happen on your computer, and this occurs over time as applications start and stop. So when this happens, system memory becomes fragmented, and it's harder for FME to allocate contiguous memory. So an easy telltale sign of this is if FME runs okay after a fresh computer restart, but struggles after your machine has been running for a while. So, if you do happen to stumble upon, your workspace looks slower than usual, it might be a good opportunity to, just restart your computer and see if that helps. Some, FME specific issues that could be causing slowdowns include, complexity of your workspace. So as Jenna was just showing, you might have lots of transformers. You might have, blocking transformers that are holding up your data. If there's a possibility to condense down these transformers, then that'll definitely speed up your workspace. As we saw, having feature caching on can hold up a lot of temporary storage, and we really only want to have this enabled when we're authoring our workspaces. When we're doing those final runs, we can turn off feature caching and feature counting, and then just run the workspace as a whole. Writer order is also something else that we can consider. We want to process the writer that handles the most data first so that it can free up space for those other writers. And bulk mode is also something we'll want to consider here, where bulk mode will help us process lots of features as opposed to features being processed individually. And it's good to pay attention to some transformers that will split up your bulk mode features into individual features, and you'll see this in the log. And another thing we can use to kind of tune our advantage to help with memory struggles with FME is to change our temporary file storage. So FME temp is a environment variable that can be manually set to adjust where FME stores temporary files. And by default, FME will store temporary files to the system temporary directory, which on many Windows machines is usually the C drive, or it might be under the user's local temporary directory. If you find that workspaces are capping out and struggling to run, and you see messages from FME about optimizing memory, then it might be a good time to consider changing where your FME temp is pointed towards. If you maybe have another hard drive that's faster, you might have a solid state drive as opposed to a hard disk drive, and it has more storage space, then this can definitely be used to your advantage to help improve your workflows. So just to recap some tips and tricks, we always want to take advantage of bulk mode in FME to keep our memory usage down. And a lot of our readers and our writers and our formats now support bulk mode. So it's something to consider when working with your workspaces to try and keep those bulk features in your workspace for as long as possible. We also want to optimize the amount of memory available to FME, whether this is adding more RAM to our machine, freeing up space by closing down other applications, or changing our FME temp location. So by default, like many other programs, FME is using that local temp directory on Windows to store those temporary files, but that directory might not be large enough due to space limitations. And as I mentioned before, if you find that FME is reaching the point where it hits a brick wall and can't finish processing a workspace, then it's always a great idea to try changing your FME temp location. Next, we'll be looking at how we can use the database to our advantage to do some database performance tuning. With databases, you might have indexes set up, which are great for searching, but less so for adding new records to your table. Index tables require the database to index each new record, which in turn slows down the database and its processes. So if we're writing to an index table in a database, then we can expect that workspace to maybe run a bit slower when writing those records to the table. And just to note, when FME is writing records to a table and those records need to be indexed, that is done with each commit. If we're writing to an unindexed table, then that means there's no overhead for the database, and we could expect our workspace to run faster. If you're curious about whether or not your tables already have indexes, you can use a database management tool such as dbeaver or Table Plus to look into this. And on the topic of databases, the location of your database in relation to your where you're running FME from will also have an impact on your database performance. It's always something to keep in mind, especially when working with cloud-hosted formats. Indexing, however, is still great for incremental updates. So if you're using updates or deletes on your database writer, then indexing will still be good for that. We also like to say that, while FME is great at what it does, we also want to use the database to our advantage and let the database do the work. So we can take advantage of the database by querying and filtering out our data early. For example, we might want to use an SQL where statement on our reader feature type. If we take a look at indexing and how we might work around the issue of having indexes on our tables, well, we can consider using the parameters on our readers to run SQL before we read or before we write, and SQL after we write. So in our SQL before we write, we can drop those indexes so that FME and the database does not have to handle the overhead that comes along with those indexes. And then we can use SQL to run after we write to rebuild those indexes on our table. So in the slide here, you can see that with our drop indexes off. So this is writing to a table with indexes still fully intact. It took around 4 minutes and 10 seconds to run this workspace. But if we had some SQL on our writer to drop those indexes and rebuild them after writing those features to the table, we found that our writer was able to write out those features, almost 2 minutes faster. And we'll just go into a quick demonstration of where you can find these parameters in FME Desktop. So I'll just share my screen again here. And in FME Workbench, what we're looking at here is a file geodatabase of addresses that we just want to write to our SQL Server instance. So on our database writer, we have the option under our navigator. If we click the drop down on our writer and we go to advanced, then we have the option here to have some SQL to run before we write and some SQL to run after we write. In the SQL to run before we write, we've specified that we want to drop our index, and we have the name of our index here called test index, and we have the name of our table that that index exists on. So before FME writes to the database, it'll drop that index for us. We then have the option to have some SQL to run after we finish writing. And what we'll be doing here is just recreating that index called test index. And we've just specified the table that we want to create that index on and the attributes that we want to create that index on. And if you're not sure whether or not your table has an index, you can always use a tool such as Table Plus to go in, take a look at your table. And on this one, I can see that I have an index called test index, and I can see which columns that index exists on. And in terms of letting the database do the work, well, if we want to use a where clause on our reader, it's as easy as adding a reader to our workspace. Here I've got a business license table. And if I open up our reader feature type, you can see in here I've specified a where clause. And in a where clause, I've specified that I want to only read in features where the status equals issued. So if I run this, and it'll retrieve those features from our database. And I'll take a preview of what our data looks like. You can see that we only read in 11,000 features and that the status is only issued. So we've only read in those features that we want to read in. And by doing so, we're taking some of the pressure off of FME so that FME doesn't have to do that filtering itself. As well, we're also preventing any unnecessary data from entering our workflow so that, if we're maybe doing some processing down the line, whether that's, maybe we're doing some attribute management or we're doing some arithmetics, then we're not needing to run all of our features through those transformers, only the ones that we need. So I'll go back to our slides here. So just to reiterate, in our navigator window, we're able to open up our reader and our writer. Specifically for this, we're looking at our writer parameters to add those SQL statements where we can drop our index and then recreate our index after writing. So at this point, we're reaching the end of our webinar. We've looked at how we can performance tune our workspace, how we can reduce time waiting around, for our processes to run. And now we have a new problem. We have extra time. So, in summary, we've looked at some key points here that we want to reduce the duplication of our transformers and filter out data early in our workflows. We want to let our database do the work. So this is something really huge when you're reading in large data sets and you can filter out your data early. You're going to be saving a lot of time and a lot of pressure on your machines. And if we are running into a brick wall, say our workspace is really struggling to run and we're seeing that our memory is reaching peak usage, then we can look at some memory management and how we can save time and effort on that side. So just before we hop into our Q&A here, you can contact us if you have any questions. We're always open to chatting with you about anything to do with data. And you can see our email there, info@safe.com. You can look out for FME 2022.1, which is going to be released very soon. And we will also be uploading our workspaces for you to download. And you can take these workspaces and apply these changes to your own data. And we also have some resources here. And Elizabeth will be throwing these down on the chat for you so you can grab those. We've got our Performance Tuning FME article, which is our main article on performance tuning. We've got our articles about feature caching and how you can improve your performance that way. We've got some more information on what bulk mode really is, and if you're interested in that and how that can improve your performance in FME, I would definitely take a look at that as we're continuing to add that to more transformers and formats, as well as how can we design for performance. So this is a series featured on our FME Academy, where you can go through some modules and some training to further understand how you can design those workspaces for performance.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. And I'll continue to drop those resource links in the chat here in a moment. But in the meantime, as a thank you for you all joining us this morning, we do have a community badge code to redeem. I will drop that in the chat now. Today's code, LPCBG. And our peak of data integration 2022 UC is just around the corner. Cannot believe it is July already. If you have yet to register for the FME UC, here is the link to do so. And Thomas just asked in the chat what the community badge is for, so I'll just address that briefly here. So if you have yet to join our FME community, please, we encourage you to do so. Lots of great forums where you can connect with other users alike and our FME experts as well. And there is badges that you can redeem and gain points towards in the community. So that is what the badge is for. In addition, safe.com/webinars, we have a ton of great webinars coming up and a lot available on demand as well. So take a browse through there for any topics of interest to you. And if you do have a moment to contribute a review to Gartner Peer Insights, we would really appreciate that. I will drop the link to do that in the chat here. And with that, it does look like we have about 20 minutes remaining for any Q&A. So if you have yet to get your questions in, we encourage you to do that now in the questions tab there. And it looks like we've had some new ones come in just now, as well as some that have been responded to. But if there's any we want to elaborate on now, we can do that. So with that, we'll turn back on our webcams and take a look at the questions here.
Yeah, there was one thing I wanted to bring up, which was some good discussion in here about the attribute manager and how, you know, maybe swapping out the attribute manager for the attribute remover or for a very specific transformer can improve your workflows. You know, at the same time, it really depends, and it takes a bit of you know, testing your workspace to see really what improves that performance. We do like to say that, you know, less is more, and it is better to have less transformers. So if you do have multiple attribute managing transformers, then it's great to condense those down. But it really does take some testing on your end to kind of figure out which transformers or which combinations are going to be working best for you.
Lots of great chats and questions that came in today. Thanks, everyone. Any others we want to highlight here?
Just looking through some of the questions.
Just seeing that question about the area gap and overlap cleaner, I'm pretty sure that one has a group processing option too. If you could try that, see if that enhances, but like Mark responded, that really depends on your data as well. But that is a hefty transformer.
We had a great question in here about can we share what tools I was using there to determine if the database table has an index, and I'll just type those into the chat. So one of them I mentioned is called dbeaver, and the other one I mentioned is called Table Plus, and these are both free programs you can use to look at whether or not your database has any indexes on, you know, those tables that you're writing to. Yeah, that's a great point. SQL Server Management Studio and Azure Data Studio, both great tools too.
All right, and as any last questions come in here, I will also mention, if you do have a moment to fill out our webinar survey this morning and let us know what you thought, we really value any feedback for improving our program. So I just chatted in the link for that in the chat panel there. Wanted to mention that.
I see a question here more about database optimization. There's a advanced training section of one of our Git books, if I can find, on just on databases. I'll put it in the chat here. This might have some more information specific to optimizing your databases. That might help.
Just reading through some of the other questions here. Yeah, unfortunately, FME doesn't have a set parameter for dropping and rebuilding those indexes, so that will it will take a bit of know-how about, you know, SQL and how you can drop and rebuild those indexes. But there's lots of great resources out there on how you can do that too. And it's as you saw there, the statements weren't too difficult, and we'll also be sharing these workspaces with you again, so you can take a look at that as sort of a point of reference.
Awesome. Any other questions we want to address? Looks like we've covered most here.
Some really great questions here. Yeah, thanks everyone.
Yeah. Okay, well, with that, we will leave things running a couple minutes longer. And I'll leave this slide up here. 2022.1 will be coming any moment now, so keep your eyes peeled for that on our download page there. And thank you to our presenters for all your hard work this morning. And thank you to everyone who joined us. So we really appreciate your time. And once again, let us know what you thought of the webinar. I'll drop the link there in the chat. And hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks for joining us
everyone.
today, everyone.
Bye for now.
Yeah, and again, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to contact us at info@safe.com, and we'll be happy to help you out.